Vishwa is an online platform. It's for everyday change makers, social champions who have been serving decades to make a difference and to make our world a better place. It's a crowdfunding and a crowdsourcing platform. We connect people who would like to make a difference with those people who would like to donate, volunteer, or give away materials and that they are not using and would like to put it under circulation.
Roshni has given life to the noble thought, psychiatry at your doorstep. With this project, we are reaching the unreachable, the underprivileged. And in this noble journey, Vishwa has been with us. Thanks a lot to Vishwa, who has helped us to reach people and also to raise funds.
Vishwa Talks is an initiative by Vishwa.org. Vishwa Talks are a series of weekly webinars hosted every Saturday that are focused on gaining in-depth knowledge from the experts on a wide range of topics that are pertinent to the current context.
One of the best collaborations that I had in 2021 is with Vishwa Talks.
Vishwa Talks is a wonderful platform, both for the speakers and the listeners. They cover varied topics, right from mental health to the environment. And it's so informative and so enjoyable.
All these are very enriching, and I congratulate Vishwa organization for their endeavors, and I wish them all the best for many more sessions.
Hello, good morning, and welcome everyone to today's Vishwa Talk. My name is Prerna, and I thank you for taking the time to join us today. For those of you who have attended a Vishwa Talk before, a warm welcome back. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, here is a little bit about us. Vishwa Talks is a space to expand the horizons of your mind. Every webinar, we call experts from different domains to discuss and examine opinions, issues, problems, and perspectives. Each webinar is an interactive session where we all walk away with more respect for each other and a deeper understanding of the topic at hand. Today on Vishwa Talks, we, along with our dignified speaker, Dr. Jenny Mallela, will explore the unique perspective of a marine scientist and how everyday people can make a positive impact on our planet through the power of science. Dr. Jenny Manera is an award-winning marine scientist. Her research addresses real-world problems focusing on pollution and climate change. Her current work focuses on assessing coral reef health and ecosystem recovery from heat stress and pollution impacts on some of the world's most remote coral reefs in the Indian Ocean. Dr. Jenny will be working closely with local communities, natural resources managers, and decision makers to ensure her research has a real impact. She has published more than 40 scientific papers with over 130 international co-authors, and her research has been cited more than 1,600 times. Dr. Jenny is also a highly qualified scientific and commercial scuba diver. This allows her to advise and lead international teams of scientists on diving-related research expeditions. She also shares her passion for the ocean through training students and colleagues in the field and giving guest talks. We are honored to have you today on Vishwa Talks, ma'am. Before we get started, I would like to inform our audience that our speaker will be taking questions from you after her main talk. So please have your questions in the chat box, or you can use the raise hand option, virtual raise hand option. We will allow you to ask your questions life. Now, without further ado, I may invite our speaker to please start today's Vishwa Talk. Ma'am, please. Ma'am, you are on mute.
Yes, thank you. The mute symbol moved. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you all today at these hashtag Wishwa Talks. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we all can.
Excellent. So I realize we have an international audience today, and I'm actually talking to you from Australia. So it's our afternoon, and it's traditional in Australia for us to acknowledge and pay our respects to our traditional owners on whose land we're talking from or working on. And today I'm talking to you from Ngunnawal country, which is in Canberra, the capital of Australia. I'd also like to use this opportunity to highlight the importance of incorporating Indigenous knowledge into the way we plan for our future. In Australia, we have 65,000 years of traditional ecological knowledge at our fingertips, yet modern science has actually failed to incorporate some of this traditional knowledge. If we are to move forward into a sustainable world, we need to be able to listen to our elders and learn from the past to move sustainably into the future. So I've been very fortunate to work on coral reefs for 2 decades now, and I've worked as a marine biologist and an environmental scientist. And I think one of the reasons I became a marine biologist is because I fell in love with the ocean, and I was also exposed to the environment as a young child. Even though I grew up in Birmingham, one of the UK's biggest cities, I was fortunate to have a garden. So I grew up collecting frogs and newts and tadpoles. I was always splashing around in the water and usually covered in mud, much to my mother's dismay. And then when I went to university, I joined the local scuba diving club and I fell in love with the ocean. I think we all know to truly excel and to be at our best, we need to immerse ourselves in what we're doing. So that can involve seeing, hearing, feeling, touching, tasting. And that's what scuba diving does. It immerses you. And of course, the added benefit, nobody can call you, nobody can email you. You are truly in the moment. And I look back on my interactions with nature as a child and as a young adult, and I realize I got so much more from this interaction with nature. During my final exams, when most students are really stressed and working really hard, I would go scuba diving on the weekends. And I would come back refreshed, revitalized, feeling calm and at peace. And I would be able to start my week or face my exams feeling relaxed. And there is so much more that the natural environment has to offer. And science is beginning to discover some of this too. So we now know that the physical environment and nature has a huge impact on our mental health and physical well-being. And similarly, we impact the environment around us. We now know from scientific research that people in hospital recover 30% faster if they're recovering in a room with a window that looks out on nature, so they can see birds or trees or a park. We also know people are 25% more productive in workspaces exposed to natural light. I work in a university, so I always try and make sure that my students have a work environment where they have a window where they can look out on nature. Imagine what that means for your businesses or your work environment or your children. 25% more productive with natural light. I also know that over the past 2 years, many of us have been living with COVID. And this means for vast periods of time, we have basically had to, stay at home, do the right thing. If we've got COVID, we're possibly isolated in a room. And in Australia, we went many months at a time without actually even being able to leave the house apart from maybe an hour at a time when we were allowed to do shopping, and that was it. And I know that I was one of the fortunate few who actually had a garden. And oh my goodness, my garden and nature became so much more important to me during these COVID years. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this. Some time outdoors helped you to feel better in yourself, helped you to feel happier. So having worked in conservation settings for over 2 decades, I'm repeatedly interacting with scientists, conservationists, managers, government people and politicians. And it's really interesting because people used to say to me, but look, we have to make some environmental sacrifices to, further development, feed people, further the economy. I'm not anti-development, I'm smart development. So what is our wildlife actually worth? The WWF in 2015 produced a report that clearly stated that tourism in the world's protected areas is a $650 billion industry. It's in its infancy and growing. That's incredible. That tells us people want to be in nature, people want to see our wildlife, and not only is it important to the planet and to our mindset, it also has an economic value. In India, it's been indicated that every rupee invested in habitat conservation returns an estimated 67 rupees. That is a huge return on your investment. Conservation can reap economic rewards. The TOFT Tigers calculated in 2010 that a single tigress in Ranthambore generated an astonishing $101 million for the local economy in visitor fees and other expenditure over the decade of her rule. We have to start being smart and realizing that the environment actually can generate money for us too. We don't need to destroy it. So I'm a marine biologist. Why are coral reefs important? Well, from my perspective, and from your perspective, we know they're culturally important. Billions of people around the world, 500 million to be exact, rely on reefs for food, income, and protection, livelihood protection. We also use them for tourism recreation. They have, as you know, they store many, many species, thousands and millions of species. Some are unknown, and some have potential uses that we're yet to discover. For example, the chemicals in sponges are being used by medical companies to develop medicines for us. We also know that they're really important for shoreline protection. In an era of climate change, when we can expect to see more storms, more hurricanes, more cyclones, so we're getting more high energy events impacting our shorelines, we now know that coral reefs can dissipate up to 97% of wave energy. And normally behind a coral reef, you would expect to see a seagrass bed, and behind that, a mangrove. All of these different ecosystems act to stabilize the sediment, protect our shorelines, and protect the communities that live along our shorelines. The reality is, we can't replace these natural services. We need to protect them, and they will protect us. So, what are coral reefs in the Indian Ocean worth? It's an estimated US $2 billion annually and growing. We know of this, tourism represents 70% and income generated from fisheries is the remainder. A value hasn't yet been put on coastal protection from coral reefs in the Indian Ocean. We actually don't know how to put a value on it. However, we could not replace that level of coastal protection by man-made structures. It's just not possible if you think about the vast area covered by reefs in the Indian Ocean. I'm in Australia today, so I thought I'd also highlight what the Great Barrier Reef is worth. The Great Barrier Reef is in the northeastern corner of Australia. It's the world's largest coral reef. You can see it from space. Australia is a country made up of 26 million people, and it generates an estimated $6.4 billion annually to the national economy and supports 64,000 jobs. If we lose the Great Barrier Reef, we lose future sustainable income and jobs for our future children and their children's children. So, climate change. How is climate change impacting our reefs today? Well, as I'm sure many of you are now aware, with climate change, we get more extreme environmental conditions. The more extreme events happen more frequently, and the magnitude of them is greater. So with warming oceans, what we see is the warm water drives more intense storms, and with it, this brings heavy rainfall. Storms can damage our reefs as that high energy smashes the reef up, because the reef is made up of calcium carbonate and sand is thrown around. But I will also say reefs have developed and evolved with cycles of cyclones and storms and hurricanes. However, what we're doing is, if you think a normal reef needs 10 to 20 years in between big events to recover, we're actually shortening the recovery period. So instead of a reef having 10 years between a really heavy, big cyclone or storm, it's 5 years or 2 years. So we're not giving our ecosystems time to regenerate. And with extreme climate, we also get more rainfall, more flood events, more water running off the land. When we remove the vegetation, we lose our agricultural soil. We lose a lot of our top layers of nutrients. It runs off into our rivers, pollutes our rivers, runs off into the ocean and smothers our reefs and our fish. So you can see how there are knock-on effects all the way downstream. I'm sure you've all seen graphs like this before. This graph demonstrates how the global sea surface temperature has been rising. And every year since 1977, the average annual global sea surface temperature has been above the 20th century average. That's this line in the middle. So if you were born after 1977, you have not witnessed a normal year. This increase in sea surface temperatures closely matches the carbon dioxide curve, the CO2 curve over the same period. There's a close correlation. The more carbon dioxide we put into the air, the more it insulates our planet, the warmer our world becomes. So, what does this mean for a coral reef? Well, a healthy coral reef has a very colourful reef made out of hard corals, and they're called hard corals because they have a calcium carbonate skeleton, the same calcium carbonate that we have in our bones. And like us, they have a skin over the top. And it's this skin and the symbiotic algae that live in the skin of corals that give it the colour. The algae gives the coral nutrients and food, and in return, the coral gives the algae a home and also feeds the algae. When a coral gets stressed from heat stress or pollution, the algae leave the coral host, and that's what we call bleaching. The coral goes white. If the water conditions return to normal, the pollution goes, or the water temperature returns to normal, the coral can recover. If the coral doesn't recover, what you see is the white bones of the coral shining through its skin, and this is what we call bleaching. And if a coral starves for long enough and bleaches for long enough, it dies. So these are images that I've taken underwater of some of my different coral reef sites. The images on the left are healthy corals in the Indian Ocean. The top middle image is a bleached coral that's still alive. And then the subsequent ones on the right and underneath show you what happens to a coral when it dies. It gets covered in algae, it looks very dead, and the fish associated with it and the other reef organisms leave. So I thought I'd give you a brief insight to some of the science I've been doing. So this bottom left picture is a coral core taken from a brain coral. And as I explained, corals are part calcium carbonate like our bones. If you think a coral grows maybe 1 or 2 centimeters a year, this coral core you can see in the bottom is about 50 centimeters long. Now a coral grows 1 to 2 centimeters a year, so I've probably got 30 to 50 years of growth data there. I can put my coral in an X-ray, the same kind of X-ray you would use as a human, and I can document annual growth bands, because like trees, corals put down annual growth bands. So I can see how fast a coral is growing. But what a coral also does is it grows in one spot. So whatever is in the water at the time of growth, that is included in the coral's skeleton as a chemical signature. So I can document pollution in my coral cores, changing temperature. And what this study showed me from Tobago and the Caribbean is that at periods when it got really, really hot, the coral stopped growing. And this is what you can see, these little red stars and these white bars in these X-rays. That shows you when the coral stopped growing during bleaching events. But what was really interesting is I took coral cores from all around the island, and the corals that bleached were at the most polluted sites. And the corals that didn't bleach were at the most clean water sites. So they didn't have sewage runoff. They didn't have nutrient runoff. So this tells you there's a lot of different things happening to corals at the same time, but clean water can really help them survive these environmental stresses. So what happens after bleaching? Well, what you can see here on the left is you can see a bleached coral. Often a coral initially appears to recover, but 6 months down the line, it gets disease. So like humans, if we're ill, we become more susceptible to future illnesses. Corals are, after all, animals. The bottom right-hand image shows you a baby coral, a juvenile coral, and that's probably about 5 millimeters big. And what this graph shows you is we have counted hundreds of baby corals on the reef. And we have documented when bleaching and storms occur, and what we find is in the year following a climate change event, a storm, a cyclone, a hurricane, coral recruitment drops. So there's less baby corals on the reef, so less future generations. So there's a knock-on effect going into the future. What you can see here is a traffic light system. So you can either get recovery following the green arrow to a healthy reef. You can either get a phase shift, which is when there's so many nutrients in the water, the algae, the fleshy green algae, can outcompete the slow growing coral, and fleshy green algae takes over the reef, and we get algal reefs, and then we lose all the biodiversity associated with our coral reefs. Or in really extreme events, we just get a dead reef. And this is typically what we see in really degraded, overfished, polluted waters, the complete loss of a reef. However, it's not all doom and gloom. These are images that I took at Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean, and I documented the 2016 bleaching. So you can see the images on the left from the bleaching. And by 2019, the good news was, despite 90% of hard corals bleaching at Christmas Island, we were seeing coral recovery. So what you can see is these faster growing branching and table corals. These are all baby corals, and they've started to come back. So that's really, really encouraging. What we need, though, is to give them the time to develop into large, mature corals. So what can we do as people? Well, this graph, this map, basically shows you per capita emissions in 2019. So this is how much CO2 was emitted per country according to the number of people, so by individual person. And as you can see, developed countries are predominantly responsible for the most CO2 emissions on a per capita basis. And CO2 emissions come from fossil fuels. In Australia, what you can see is the majority of our CO2, carbon dioxide emissions, come from coal, oil, and gas. So again, fossil fuels. So what we really need to do to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions is to stop using fossil fuels. We need to capture our CO2 and store it, and we need to be able to build a bridge to the next century so we can allow our planet to recover. So in Australia, like India, we have vast amounts of sunlight. So solar panels are an obvious solution. Wind power is an obvious solution. There's so many technological solutions out there, and India is part of the answer to this. We really need to be thinking about smart technology to bring us into the future. But blue carbon is also something many people haven't heard about. Coastal wetland ecosystems, for example, mangroves, seagrasses, salt marshes, store vast amounts of carbon. And they actually store this carbon 10 times faster than mature tropical forests on the land. The carbon is stored in the soil for hundreds to thousands of years, and this is because the soil is typically anaerobic. It lacks oxygen. So the carbon decomposes very, very slowly, so it gets locked up. Our coastal wetlands have the capacity to store 3 to 5 times more carbon per equivalent area than tropical forests. And they're storing it in the soil, not above ground. So that means if there's a forest fire, the carbon still stays locked in the soil. Plus, they're our wetlands. They're less likely to burn. The problem here, worldwide, we've actually lost around 3/4 of our wetlands since the 1900s. So we really need to be restoring our mangroves and our seagrass beds alongside protecting our coral reefs. I'm going to take a change of tack now and move on to another pollution issue, which I'm sure many of you are more familiar with, and that's plastic pollution. So I'm going to give the audience a moment to think. Who knows why scuba divers always dive with a dive knife? I'll let you have a little think here. So for the scuba divers in the audience, you all know that when you scuba dive, part of your safety equipment is having a dive knife on you at all times. And we don't have a dive knife to battle off sharks. The reason we have to dive with a dive knife with one of those little notches on it, if you can see the little notch, is because the chances are we will at some point swim into a discarded fishing net or a fishing line. And to make sure that we make our way back up to the surface, we need to be able to cut ourselves free or our dive buddy free. So plastic impacts not just wildlife, it impacts us in the water too. So I've been lucky enough to work on some of the world's most remote reefs. This includes Christmas Island and Cocos Keeling in the Indian Ocean, the 2 stars on the left, and One Tree Island on the Great Barrier Reef, which is a research-only station, which means that only small groups of up to 24 researchers are allowed on it at any one time. And what all these remote islands have in common, despite having very low numbers of people living on them, is you can walk along the high tide line and there's vast amounts of plastic. Bottle caps, bottle tops, discarded cigarette lighters, flip-flops. I'm sure you've seen similar too. When I dive in the water, I also see plastic. So these images are again from Christmas Island, a small island in the Indian Ocean. And what happens is at certain times of year, southward flowing currents come from the north, moving down around the islands, and they bring plastic from other countries. And as you can see, plastic bags, buckets, bottles, and you just get currents just covering the surface of the water column with this rubbish. And then when you go under the water, you can also see evidence on the reef. The bottom left image is a fishing line that's wrapped around the reef and started to become overgrown. If we move over to the east of Australia, again, One Tree Island, these are the types of plastic we're seeing, and these are some of my students who are studying these plastics. The top right-hand image is a seahorse encased in packing foam. The bottom image is a child's shoe with barnacles on it. And what happens is these plastics enter the ocean somewhere else, and then they raft on the currents, and they can bring barnacles, organisms, pollutants. So they act as a vector, introducing species and pollutants into locations where they haven't been before. One Tree Island in particular is a bird sanctuary. Humans are actually only allowed around from the low tide to the high tide watermark when we walk around the island. The rest of the island is dedicated to birds, but this is what the birds are encountering and feeding on. And it's problematic. It's universally problematic around the world. Excuse me. So, where does the plastic pollution come from? As I've said, it comes typically from other locations as it circumnavigates the globe. And logically, and research now backs this up, we now know that most of our plastic pollution comes from densely populated, built-up urban areas where single-use plastics are most commonly used. And the plastic doesn't remain at the place of origin. What happens is it gets used by people. If it's not disposed of correctly or recycled, it then ends up on our land. It then rains and can end up in our waterways and then washes on into the reef and our oceans. And once it's there, it's very hard to remove. Plastic takes a really long time to break down, and the problem is it just breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces that we call microplastics. And nearly every single piece of plastic that we've ever produced is still in existence, apart from the small quantities that we've burnt, which I should add is not a great solution. We know that the plastic is hazardous to marine life. We know that both humans and animals can get tangled in it. It causes injury and drowning, like this turtle on the right that got caught in a fishing line. We know that organisms and pollutants hitch a ride and can be transported around the world. And we have no idea what the long-term consequences of all this plastic in the marine environment is going to be. We're going to be living with the legacy of it for very many generations to come. So if we want to be smart, what are our management solutions? What this map shows us is the round circles are when you get maximum plastic input into the world's oceans from some of the biggest rivers. And what the shading shows us is when their peak rainfall is. And what you can see is plastic input is typically during the rainy season in all of these places. So if you want to get the best bang for your buck, you should really make sure that you pick up the plastics and stop them entering rivers and waterways before the rainy season happens. Where does it go? So again, if we look at these dots, which show us where these are the world's most polluting rivers, and which shows us where they're entering, where the plastics are entering the ocean. But these red dots show you where the plastic typically ends up, or at least the plastic at the surface of the ocean. So these red dots are from ships data, where they're reporting more than 5 pounds of plastic per square mile. So when we think about any kind of pollution, we really need an integrated approach. Scientists need to talk with business. Business needs to talk with government. We all need to talk with politicians and decision makers. We need to include this kind of education in our schools. It surprises me how many politicians haven't got a basic scientific background or don't understand the environmental consequences of climate change. And we need to be able to speak to our politicians, tell them what we care about, and take sensible voting decisions. So when we're managing plastic pollution, we need to think from source to sink. We need to know where it's coming from, when it comes, what drives people's behaviour, why they're using single-use plastic. And then we need to come up with alternatives. Are there plastic alternatives? What are our restoration options? How do we clean up this mess and help this planet? So, if my kitchen sink was overflowing and flooding my kitchen floor, before I start mopping up, I'm going to go to the tap and I'm going to turn off the tap. It's completely crazy to keep mopping up the water if I haven't stopped the source of the water. And the same holds true for plastic pollution. We need to turn off the plastic tap, and we need a global agreement to close the loop. And there are some great initiatives out there. For example, who's heard of social plastic? This is when plastic from the ocean is reprocessed and used to make new alternative products. So it's recycled and transformed, and then it enters the global supply chain, demonstrating clear environmental, social, and economic impacts. In 2017, the Plastic Bank, and yes, there is a plastic bank, valued plastic waste at 50 cents per kilo. So there's a market for it. You can also get plastic neutral certification for your business. So a little bit like carbon credits, Every amount of plastic created, a measured equivalent of plastic is recovered and removed from the environment by an individual or company through recycling, waste management. And you get plastic offset credits. Can you imagine a plastic neutral city, a plastic neutral country, dare I say, a plastic neutral world? It would be fabulous. So, what can we do? How do we protect our planet? And how do we help our planet protect us? Well, for many of you, we can make smart choices. I'm going to suggest you think about your children's future and your grandchildren's future. What kind of world do you want them to live in? I'm also going to say, think about yourself. What makes you happy? Get out in nature. Appreciate your green spaces. Plant a tree if you can get involved in a voluntary project or another green project. See what volunteer opportunities are out there. It'll be great for your mind and your health. If you can't get outdoors, why not grow your own herbs? Try not to use single-use plastics. It's actually surprisingly hard. You have to ask people not to give them to you. Try and reduce your carbon footprint. Think about where your food's coming from. How far does it travel? Are you using businesses that are sustainable, that make green choices? Are you choosing environmental holiday options? Are you choosing to do walking meetings to help your colleagues instead of sitting across a table? Why not go for a walk in the park while you discuss what you want to do? Are you supporting local businesses and local farmers? Again, that means you're not paying the carbon credits for things to be flown into you. There's a lot of solutions out there. Did you know that a 5% increase in tree cover can reduce nearby daytime temperatures by 2.3 degrees centigrade in cities? That's amazing. Australia is getting hotter, India is getting hotter, the UK's had bushfires and 40-degree temperatures for the first time ever. We need to be regreening our world. And India is leading the way in this. Of the 136 tree cities of the world in 2021, Hyderabad and Mumbai were in that list. So there are some really great initiatives that you can get involved with. And if you can't physically do it, support them. Here we see women in Mumbai planting mangrove saplings to protect the local area against rising sea levels. But in addition to that, those mangroves are going to trap carbon dioxide. Mangroves also support juvenile fish, so they're going to support the fisheries in the area. And they're also going to produce shade. So there are so many benefits to regreening our world. If you want to know more about our research, you can go to we have a webpage called A Coral Affair. And it tells you about our research, it tells you about the science, but there's also resources. We've collated lesson plans for teachers, information for parents, and there's even activities to do with the kids if you happen to be stuck at home because you're in COVID lockdown. So please have a look at our webpage. Also, if you'd like to support any of the science, you can also make a donation. And you can go to the Australian National University and look at the Coral Reef Conservation and Management Fund. I'd like to end by inviting you to commit time to spending time in nature and value it like anything else in your schedule, like going to the gym. We know that spending time in nature leads to creativity, boosts inspiration, is good for your health and your mental space. It's great for your employees, it's great for your business, it's great for your children. You really don't have anything to lose. I'd like to thank you for listening to me today, and I'd be happy to take some of your questions. Thank you. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. That was a wonderful session, ma'am. We learned so much of knowledge from you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful session. Now, before we move towards the Q&A round, I'll request the audience to take a quick poll. This poll is for us to understand you a little better and better curate the topics that we will be bringing up on this platform in the coming Vishwa Talks. Now, while we are taking that survey, ma'am, I would like to express my gratitude to you and everybody who has joined us today for their presence and interactive contribution to making this webinar a success. It's a niche audience where we all are getting together to kind of protect environment, to show our interest and to support the cause that we are here and we are inclined towards the cause and protecting the environment. I see chat box filling in with the questions and also with so much of interest, people has joined us from all over, India and Australia. So it's a lovely audience that we have today. I thank you, thank everybody. And I extend my gratitude to our wonderful speaker, Dr. Jenny, for taking out time from her busy schedule to grace the event. Now we'll proceed towards the Q&A round. So if you have any questions, please put it up on the chat box. And if not, then you can use the virtual raise hand option to ask the question live from Dr. Jenny.
Yes, I'd encourage people to ask me a direct question. I can see that there are questions coming in as well. So would you like to ask a question? Can I answer it?
Yeah. So I see, so there's one question from Priyanka that says, what is the immediate action I can take now to protect coral reef as a common man?
It really depends on where you live. So one of the main things I say to people is when you buy food, and when I buy fish, do you buy from sustainable fisheries? Do you know where your food is coming from? And for me, it's really interesting. Often if you speak to your fishmonger or the person you buy your fish from, they can tell you where your fish is coming from. What else can you do to protect coral reefs? You can tell people how important they are. You can stop people putting pollution on the reef. You can go and enjoy them, spend time on them. Because if a resource is considered valuable and people are using it and it generates money, then people are more likely to protect it, put a value on a reef.
Yeah. Hope that answers your question. We all can talk about environment, and now in the times of social media, we all can be an activist. We all can voice out our words. We can voice out the knowledge or the understanding that we have to our, in our circle. And even if we are talking one person into this and making them understand, it is going to make a difference. Next question is from Mr. Mudit Jain. He's asking, the way to protect the corals or best way to leave them alone. But then my question is ecotourism, the way to protect the corals or best to leave them alone. But what about jobs? We know the problems, but we are not solving them. In Tuticorin in South India, the coral reefs were completely destroyed to make calcium carbide.
Okay, so this is a really interesting story too. So coral mining is a big problem and people do use corals for the calcium carbonate skeleton. However, that comes at a cost because you lose the fisheries, you lose the shoreline protection, you lose the jobs, you lose the carbon storage. So yes, I agree with you that you shouldn't be touching coral reefs, but there is no harm in looking. We have a phrase, when marine biologists have a phrase, when you're on the beach, you should leave only footsteps behind, footprints in the sand. You shouldn't leave your rubbish behind. And when the next wave comes in, it washes away your footprint and it's like you've never been there. So you were a respectful visitor. And I would say the same about a coral reef. They're just putting your head in the water, whether or not you're snorkeling or you're scuba diving or you're just leaning over the side of the boat to have a look. There's no harm in that. But when you're on the boat, make sure that the anchor isn't thrown on the reef. Are they using mooring buoys? Don't support dynamite fishing. There are parts of the world where they actually fish by throwing dynamite in the water, and that kills everything and all the fish rise to the surface. But it's insane. You've killed your habitat and all your fish. Use sustainable management practices. When you're in the market, for example, you shouldn't take the biggest fish necessarily, because the biggest fish is the one that produces the most eggs and the most young. With coral reef fish, the bigger the fish, the more babies it can have. So if you see a really, really huge old grandmother fish, leave it, because she will put 10 times, 100 times more baby fish in the water than, say, a very small fish, a quarter of the size. So there are some really basic precautionary steps you can take. But I would encourage people to use nature and get out in nature, because that's how people learn about it and that's how people value it. And if we as humans don't value something, then we don't tend to protect it.
That's one more way when we as an individual, wherever we are staying, no matter if we are staying nearby to a seashore or an ocean, we can use this. Like if we cannot, we need not buy that fish, like you said, which is very large in shape. It can be carrying, babies, or it can be in that phase that it can reproduce more fishes. So we can leave that. That's one more point that we can take away from that, in our daily life, no matter where we stay.
And I would always reach out to the local, often local people know this too. So this is when I referred to traditional knowledge and local knowledge. Often you can speak to local fishermen or the local community and say, what is a good thing to eat here? What will ensure that you still have fish here for your children and your children's children? What should we be doing while we're visiting your home and your location to help protect your environment and enjoy it? Reach out to local people, reach out to local scientists and find out the way you should be acting, because everywhere will have different species, different animals, different habitats. Don't be afraid to ask, how do I use nature sustainably and responsibly? Because when I go somewhere new, I will always try and find out first.
Yeah. Next question is by Mr. Ganesh. Can you please share how fruitful has been the research to produce Indonella, I'm sorry if I'm not getting the word correctly, Indonella saccharinaceus, aka pet-eating bacteria. This can be a great help to reduce plastic in the ocean.
Okay, so there are certain organisms that can break down plastic. I'm not sure if I got all of your question in there. So I know, for example, they've found in certain rubbish dumps that there is bacteria that is starting to be able to break down plastic. And they're still trying to work on this in other habitats and in other environments. But yes, it is something that scientists are working on, and we are hoping that there's a possibility that we may be able to do that in the marine environment too. It may be at some point in the future possible, for example, to modify a filter feeding organism so that a sponge, for example, might be able to break down microplastics. So we're hoping that future science and future technology will bring us the answers, but we're not there yet. But I am an optimist and I am hopeful. And one thing I know about humans is we're very creative, we're very innovative. And if people really want to do something, we normally find a way.
One more question that we have here. The Tobago study showed recovery from bleaching at unpolluted sites. How come most of the GBR offshore, not nutrient enriched, is not much recovered after years and successive events?
I think you've actually answered that question yourself. Coral reefs need a recovery period, somewhere between 10 to 20 years for the system to recover. And what's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is we're just seeing back-to-back bleaching events. It's really hard for a coral reef to come back from that. We need to actually help our reefs out. We need to be limiting global warming. We need to be implementing, not only reducing our CO2 emissions, we need to be implementing carbon capture so that we give our oceans a chance to recover and survive.
One question that I have, scuba divers, you yourself a really good scuba diver. So how how scuba divers, how they are contributing towards protecting the coral reefs, or how they are contributing towards protecting the ocean, cleaning the ocean, or keeping the balanced marine life there? Is there any tips that you can give it to them?
So first of all, I'd say most scuba divers know that when you're on the reef, you look, you don't touch. So corals can grow very slowly and their skin is very delicate. So sure, get up close and look at them, but try very hard not to touch them. Secondly, there are some great initiatives where people will actually go out on a reef, scuba dive on a reef, and collect as much plastic and rubbish that they find on the reef. So they do that on the adjacent beaches and the coastlines, but they will also do that diving underwater. And not only does that raise awareness, but it also helps clean up some of that rubbish as well. What else can divers do? They can, well, when you go as a tourist diver to a location, you stay in local accommodation, you eat local food, contribute to the local economy. And I think also most people who enjoy nature, they learn about nature and then they go home and they tell their friends and their family about what they've seen. And I think all of these conversations are really, really important, and really important for your children to hear too. So I think there are many ways that we can help as scuba divers.
Yeah. So, when you mentioned children, we had one talk with Mr. Arvind a couple of months back, and he's a scuba diver instructor himself, and he takes part in cleaning the ocean, and along with her 8-year-old daughter. So she herself is the youngest scuba diver, and both of them collected around 600 kgs and more, I think now even more tons of plastic out of ocean. So that's a wonderful initiative, and we really appreciate how he's educating or inspiring his daughter to do this, and he's with us today. Arvind sir, we would request if you can inspire with your story. You have already done. If you can talk a little bit about how you and your daughter have together come and clean the ocean.
Of course, yes. This is a very, very nice section, this one. I joined a bit late, but it's a really interesting topic which you are initiated. Thank you, ma'am, for a really great input from your side. And thanks to Vishwa Talk also. Of course, yes. So focusing on next generation, that's what I'm targeting on. So starting with my daughter. So yeah, she has collected like, you are right, like now 800 kgs of plastics of the bottom of the ocean. And my daughter started doing cleanups on the roadside, right? Not immediately going to the beach because the age limits. I'm talking about diving. So she started cleaning in the roadside. The people will tease my daughter. Why you are cleaning? You're not going to the school. What do you do if you're collecting the rubbish from the roadside? A lot of people laugh at me and my daughter. I now like more than 30 or 40 kids joining with my daughter to clean up the same village roads and beaches. And slowly I'm teaching diving also. I'm just showing all the marine life, how they are affecting from the ghost nets and plastics. And they also a lot of involvement now. So we are doing a lot of workshops, and of course, yeah, the workshops and hands-on training program is very much important to get the next generation very active to take care of our ocean from these plastics. So yes, and yeah.
Lovely. So we are from that session itself, after knowing your work and how your daughter has joined hands, and she's doing a wonderful work. We are inspired, and the kind of appreciation countrywide. Both of them they're getting awards, they're getting appreciation. I think that is inspiring the future generation as well, and also parents, that they should teach them young. Thank you so much, Arvind sir.
Agreed.
I agree.
And also one more thing we are not doing for the awards, because this but for the kids point of view is like appreciation, and if you get some kind of certification appreciation, they do. So now she collected like 700. So that appreciation gives like more motivation, interest to collect more and more. So other kids also will join or like hands-on. So yes, yeah, you're right, Preeti. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. And really, really wonderful event which you are organized. Thank you, ma'am. You got a very good input. We'll keep it in mind.
I would like to actually agree with what you were saying, and I don't know if it's the same in India, but in Australia the children do a subject called sustainability, and as part of that, my son, who is also 8 years old, he and his school friends, the school organizes this, they also go out and they collect rubbish all around the local school in the local area. And I think every single school in at least the Australian Capital Territory, Canberra, where I am, has a similar initiative where the children have an organised day where they put on gardening gloves and they go and they collect up all that rubbish, they take it back, they sort it. And they've been doing all kinds of recycling initiatives. And they also, my son takes a packed lunch to school. And what they say is they want a packed lunch that has no plastic in it. So whatever you put it in reusable containers, use metal. Do not use anything that comes wrapped in plastic. And that again is a really great initiative. If you're teaching your children to make their own food and not just use this processed plastic wrapped stuff, the wrappers are just disposed. So I think there's some great initiatives out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, how it is important to guide the children. On Vishwa Talks, we are bringing up Vishwa Talks Junior. So we understand how it is important to imbibe the knowledge, not just about environment, sustainability, but also about Indian culture or art and culture, the rich Indian heritage, or mental health for that matter. So we are bringing up Vishwa Talks Junior, where we are, along with the schools, we would be conducting talk which would be specific to the children. We'll be inviting speakers, inspiring speakers like you, ma'am, and sir, like you, who can let the children know, can educate them, that imbibe them something which they cannot get that or imbibe that knowledge in within their classrooms. So Vishwa Talks Junior is one such initiative and a vision of our founder, Mrs. Shrivani, and it's going to launch soon. And if any one of you in the audience, if you want your kids to be part of Vishwa Talks Junior, you can subscribe to Vishwa Talks. You will get the link in the chat box. Thank you, Arvind sir, for.
Thank you so much.
We'll have your daughter again on Vishwa Talks Junior. I think she'll be a great inspiration for the children.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you then.
That was a wonderful insight that we got just now, ma'am. One question that meanwhile has popped up here is, in regards to coastal interdial restoration to support coral protection, what are the first steps? Example, seagrass first, mangroves first? Does it matter? What things need to be taken into consideration?
So I would say that habitats work together. For example, mangroves have these really cool roots. They basically provide a structure for juvenile fish, so that's the young fish, to hide and hang out. And when they get a little bit bigger, they will venture out on the reef, typically when they're able to protect themselves. So if you think about mangroves and seagrass beds as supporting juvenile fisheries, and then the coral reef supporting the bigger fish, and then often So different parts of their life history will actually need the different habitats. So if you are aware of an area that has historically always had mangroves, seagrass beds, and coral reefs, you need all three to support that ecosystem. Mangroves are pretty easy to replant typically, and there's some great mangrove restoration projects. Seagrass beds can be a little bit more tricky, but again, it's been done and there are techniques to do that. And again, we're also trying to work out coral reef restoration techniques, but again, on a large scale, they're really hard to do. There have been cases where people have been able to restore small areas of reefs, but again, it relies on a lot of, you need a solid substrate basically for corals to regenerate. And there are all kinds of initiatives like reef balls where we put artificial man-made substrates down so that the corals can start growing to those again. But so what comes first? It's hard to know. I would say try and maintain all your marine ecosystems because none of them act in isolation. The marine realm is really interconnected, as are all our planetary processes. So yeah, you need all three. But I'm glad that you raised that. That's a really good question. Thank you.
So while we are approaching towards the end of the webinar, I see there are a lot of new faces who have joined today. I would like to talk a little bit about what Vishwa is. So Vishwa is an integrated social change-making platform. It's a crowdfunding and a crowdsourcing platform that is aimed at helping anyone find the support that they need in their efforts to have dreams for themselves and for others, and in the process, make the world a better place. We all know that we can help somebody, and we all know that there is someone out there that needs help, but we do not know how to reach out to them, or if we do not know that if whatever help we are going to offer, be it monetary or non-monetary, is of that worth, or is it going to be utilized? Is it going to reach out to the beneficiary? Vishwa is bridging that gap. Vishwa has a great vision. Our founder, Mr. Shivani, has a great vision to bridge that gap, to make sure everybody gets that help, be it NGOs or individuals who need help. So that's the vision behind Vishwa. And Vishwa Talks is an initiative by Vishwa, where we believe that one single talk has the ability to change or can affect a movement or can start a movement. We bring experts from various backgrounds on all the causes, be it mental health or health and family, art and culture, and environment, etc. And we bring the speakers, we bring the experts, we bring the actual change makers in this fields. And we until now we have around 6,000 plus Vishwa Talks subscribers who have benefited from the events. Every event we discuss some very pertinent topic that is relevant to current context. And the vision behind Vishwa Talks, like I said, that even a child or even an individual can benefit a lot from a talk, from a beautiful talk that we host. In the process of making this an integrated social change-making platform, we are introducing Vishwa Talks Junior and Vishwa Talks Youth as well. Youth is for college students and youth, where they need an inspiration, where they need a guidance to redirect their energy towards a goal, towards a purposeful goal. We believe in the power of a single talk to inspire the whole generation. Our goal with every Vishwa Talk is to empower the youth with new relevant knowledge and offer the opportunity to connect with change makers and be the change makers of this world Along with Vishwa Talks, we have materials. So there is a stigma attached around using the used products, be it clothes, be it high-end clothes, or be it electronics or anything. We believe it is sustainable that we reuse, recycle, refurbish, and use the products. Not just Vishwa is a platform which enables anyone to give away their material, be it clothes, furniture, books, anything, to someone who is in need. Not just NGOs or not just people in need. Anyone like you and me, if there is any products that you feel that would be that you are not using but can be of help for anyone else, please list your materials on Vishwa Talks. Try decluttering your house once in a while, and maybe your 1 hour of effort here can be help a lot of individual, can help a child in their education with the books or with electronic items or clothes, anyone who might need it. So all together, all the platforms together, we are building a community. So we all are a part of a community which called Vishwa Champion of Social Change. You can be a part of this community, and you will get regular updates about any person who needs help, immediate help, or any person who needs help for education or for building a mental health support. We have we have a lot of fundraisers live on our platform right now. You can look for our website www.vishwa.org. Go to our website and you will see various fundraisers. You will see various other verticals where using which you can donate and using which you can offer materials, or you can volunteer for any NGOs very soon on our Vishwa platform. Recently, Shrujana, a girl who was living with cerebral palsy, she was very much interested in the education. She was pursuing graduation in one of the government colleges, and she used to walk miles to reach her college. Her principal, Mr. Madhu Srivastav, found out that she's having difficulty in reaching to college, but still she's somehow managing it. He started a fundraiser on our platform to raise money to buy an electric tricycle for her. And soon, within a month of time, we were able to buy an electric tricycle from her, crowdfunding this amount, and also one of the anonymous individual donor who contributed the most. Now she is using the tricycle. She's very happy. She's attending the school, attending her college, and she is very determined to complete her education and actually be independent in her life. Similarly, I'm sure all of us are very driven towards cause and very driven towards someone whom we come across that might need help. One of such group of girls, students, is of Totapalli Zila Parishad High School. Here, there is no proper toilet for girl students. In fact, these girl students have to go to nearby houses in the study breaks, in the class, in between the breaks of their classes, to use the toilet. The toilets are open, there is no water facilities, the walls are broken, the doors are broken, there's no sanitation facilities available there. And in this particular school, number of girl students are in majority. I think as a society, it is our duty to come forward, help and contribute in this cause, and make sure these girls stay encouraged, stay motivated. An issue like lack of toilets should not come in the way of their education. Please visit our website. Their help is needed by group of, and there's an old age home that needs your help. There are HIV kids that needs your help. There is an NGO called Roshni Trust who is trying to bring psychiatry, who is trying to bring mental health support to everybody, especially underprivileged. So we'll request you all to please visit the website and contribute as little or as much as you can, because even one single amount can become like a ray of hope to these beneficiaries. With that, I thank you everybody for attending today's event. Please be part of Vishwa Social Champion, even if you feel that right now you do not have any cause that you can support. Please be part of Vishwa Social Champion. It's a big community where we will be able to interact with a lot of change makers and will be able to support anybody who needs help. Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful session today. And I thank everybody who joined us today. I'll just spotlight this. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful session today. It was so insightful. We got so much, even if we are not living, countryside, or we are not living in the sea region, we still know that how we can contribute for this. So, and so many of us are going to take back a lot of information and a lot of insight from this. A lot of teachers, researchers who are going to who joined us today, I'm sure they took a lot of value. Businessmen who joined us today, I'm sure, using their resources that they have, they are going to bring some difference. And I think we all have that responsibility towards the nature. Any last words from you, ma'am?
Yes, I'd like to thank everybody. It was a real pleasure to take part in the Wishwa talk today, and I look forward to seeing future talks. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Ma'am, there'll be one breakout room pop-up. You can. Yes, the next talk. Sorry, I forgot. The next talk, like I mentioned, we have various causes, and one, art and culture being one. We are having Dr. Jennie Mallela, a dance historian, who is going to talk about performing history. We have heard history in the books. We know history that, okay, we can read about our history. But while performing through the art form, through the dance form, we can also talk about history. We can talk about rich Indian cultural heritage. So join us on 30th July, 11 a.m. You have the registration link. And if you want to always stay updated with the upcoming talks that we have and stay updated regarding Wishwa Talks Junior and Youth, please subscribe to Wishwa Talks. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.